Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I'm your moderator, Karl Cassell. We have an interesting and a provocative topic that we'll be covering today. Some have speculated whether there are numerous or no problems in the church at all, while some merely call it a transitional period, and finally others would say that a much-needed adjustment is happening. Some of the more visible issues confronting the modern-day church are older pastors or clergy, online giving options, declining membership, millennials not attending services, or social media growth, just to name a few. Today we'll discuss whether these issues confronting Christendom can really be termed as a crisis, or is it just merely a transitional period? Joining me today on the panel are three individuals who will definitely bring some clarity to this issue. On my immediate left, we have Charles Crawley, member of Christ Episcopal Church. Good morning.
Good morning.
In the middle here, we have Charlotte Martin, Professor Emeritus from Mount Mercy University.
Morning, thank you.
Good morning. And finally, we have Nate Frambach, Professor of Pastoral Theology from Wartburg Seminary. Good morning.
Morning to you, Karl. Thank you.
And so, we just want to start out today. Thank you guys for being here, first of all. But just want to throw out the question, are local churches meeting the needs of their congregants, in you guys' view?
That's an interesting place to start. I would have to say that I think my parish is meeting the needs of the people who are actively engaged with it. It's St. Pius X Church, and we have lovely liturgy. We have probably the greatest liturgist in, I don't know, North America or something at least. She's fabulous. We have a great pastor. I enjoy myself there very much. I live 3 blocks from another parish, and I drive 3 miles to go to St. Pius, and wouldn't have it any other way. So.
Okay. Anybody else?
Interesting phenomenon. Go ahead, Charles.
Well, I think my church, Christ Episcopal Church here in Cedar Rapids, does a great job with its congregation. We have a very loving fellowship, and the people there are very happy with each other. We have an energetic new rector that's leading us in new directions. But we also face the problems of most mainline Protestant churches, which is decline. And lack of young people, and the competition over time. That was one thing that probably could have been brought up, is how we're competing now for time with other organizations, and it's really eating away at us and what we can do.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
One thing that we've talked about is, do you count regular church attendance monthly instead of weekly now? And that's something, Nate, you probably know about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a super fascinating point, Charles, because in some ways, like, what are the metrics, in terms of how we gauge or how we measure a person's or a family or, involvement in church life? Are the metrics, I mean, when it comes to participation, is it attendance, or is it engagement in ways that seek to embody the witness of the faith, both within and outside of, a church building in its context? I mean, I think that's a really fascinating question. Just the way you frame that. I mean, is it now a monthly thing? Because I think there was a day where it's like there was a week in, week out kind of metric. Do you worship, or do your kids go to confirmation? Are they involved in catechism, education? I think that's fascinating. For me, it's really interesting because I'm a pastor who teaches at a theological school. So, and yet with my spouse and our kids, we are involved in the life of a local church. And so it's kind of a weird combination, because we go to a place and participate each week in the way that a lot of people do. But then my day in, day out, my weekday job is I'm teaching those who are aspiring to lead in churches, whether as a pastor, as a deacon, as an educator, as a youth director. So for me, it's kind of, I have this macro perspective on a lot of the data. You know, Charlotte and I, just in our few brief emails, you know, communicated a little bit about some of the data out there when it comes to what's going on with, quote unquote, the church. But I also participate, and so that kind of question that you ask is a, like,
So you
boots
see
on the
what
ground.
you're teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I see it, I experience it, and I wonder about it. I wonder about it also. So yeah.
So I was going to say, so you guys talk a little bit more about the membership issue. Are we seeing our churches grow? And if membership is now being evaluated on coming monthly instead of maybe weekly, and I know not everyone does that, how do you capture or best get a pulse of your congregants if they're not coming regularly?
Right. So the Catholic churches for years, and I'm sorry I can't be more specific than that, but I think nationwide, every October we do a count. Every weekend, the ushers or whatever, when they're doing the collection, they write down the number in every pew and they add it up every weekend. And we, year after year, have about 33% there at a given weekend. You know, we have 3 masses, but when everyone is all added together, compared to the number that are on the books as registered congregants, you know, parishioners. You know, so, and I mean, I'm there every week, and I don't have the best mind for names or faces, but I would swear the same people are there every week. So I don't think there are a lot of monthly Catholics. I think there are a lot of Christmas and Easter Catholics.
Right.
You know, when we have Christmas and Easter, we have 500 extra people in the other room watching on closed circuit TV or whatever you call it. So I don't know. I'm not sure where I was going with that.
No,
but
that's good. That's helpful.
That's how we do. You know, we have a sense of who they are. And our pastor, I mean, I like him a lot, but I always chuckle a little bit. He will frequently remind us how important it is to go to Mass every weekend. But he's reminding the people who go to Mass every weekend. And,
that's right.
And you
Preaching
know,
to the choir.
I just like, yep, you know, here I am.
Thanks for the reminder.
Thanks.
I'll be here
I
next
agree.
week.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
I think this is a real fascinating shift that's taken place in North American Christianity. I can't necessarily speak about other religious traditions, certainly not globally. I mean, I spent most of January on the continent in Switzerland and France, and was engaged with more global church bodies there in Geneva at the Lutheran World Federation, at the World Council of Churches. And the whole question about how does one gauge or measure a person's engagement in their faith tradition. I think that's a huge shift that's taken place, and I think it's a shift that's taken place certainly in this American context. I mean, and I say that because there are other Americas, right? I mean, so in the North American context, it's a significant shift, but I think it's a shift that's also happened in other, maybe more westernized parts of the world, and that shift is how does one measure a person's engagement? Because I think there was a day, at least in this America, where you measured it by, do you go to church? Do you participate in education? Do your kids go to youth ministry, confirmation? I mean, there are certain, and do you give? You know, do you make your offering and your tithe and all this on a regular, if not weekly basis? And I think that day is past. And so one of the struggles, I think, for church and all of its expressions now is to figure out how one, not even really, measures may not even be the right word, but I mean, how do we gauge a human being's engagement in the faith that is deeply a part of them?
Yes.
Right?
Well, I think what we see in our church is we have a very social justice oriented church, and so we have people involved in feeding people during the week. We have people with the food pantry. We have people involved in interfaith activities. Just a myriad of things that happen during the week and not on the weekend, and it's actually coming out of their faith. That's what's motivating. At least that's what I think it is. So I think that use the term engagement, which I think is maybe a better term. Right. But we seem to be so concerned about measuring things in the old ways that the new ways are harder for us to do. And maybe but you know, the fact of the matter is, churches still have, unfortunately, bills to pay and all the mundane things that make up life. And so what do you do when those people are not showing up and doing that sort of weekly giving or whatever? No, I mean, wow, there's a whole bunch right there. From the Christian perspective, at least, and certainly can't speak about, let alone for, our siblings who are from Judaism or from Islam or other great religious traditions. But from a Christian perspective, millennia ago, the Christian faith is something that is to be lived. I mean, it's a way of life, right? This is what you're saying, right? I mean, Charles, and to some degree, Charlotte alluded to this, if not in what you said, but in some of our prior correspondence. What happens in one's life day in, day out, right? It may not be a Sunday thing, it may not be a weekend thing, but how is it that we evince the faith that is a part of us, what we believe? And these are very difficult things to measure, but they're also, I think they're a more friendly way for a lot of younger humans, a lot of the younger generations, to think about living what they believe, right? I don't have to really prove anything. There's no one I have to prove this to, but what I need to do is just be more authentic day in, day out to what I actually believe. And if anybody else picks up on that, great, but I'm not here to prove that to anyone, right? Well, and maybe this is one of your questions, Carl, but it seems to me that when I listen to young people, millennials, they're really strapped for time. And for me, I kind of put the monkey on the corporations back, because they're requiring people to work 50, 60 hours a week sometimes, and it goes against the whole grain of the 8-hour movement, which was 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours for everything else. And so once you start pushing that, then where does that time go? And so I've had young people tell me that, look, you know, Sunday should be our time to be together as a family, and we can't spend half of it in church. And so it has to come out in other ways.
So here's the voice of the skeptic about some of that, though, for lack of a better word right now. In my feeble understanding, the church is a worshiping community. And if, you know, I fully endorse and applaud people living their faith and serving the poor and feeding the hungry and so on. But when the church feeds the hungry, it has formed itself as a worshiping community that then, because of the meaning of who it worships and why it worships, feeds the hungry. There are all kinds of folks who feed the hungry, and you know, God bless them all. The end result in the hungry person's belly is the same. Exactly. I get that, but I don't want the church to throw itself out with the bathwater in trying to, you know, to find ways to be like relevant, which is to me almost a 4-letter word.
So how does the church involve itself in some of our social justice issues? And there are many today. Should there be a line drawn, or can it be too much at times. What are your thoughts, your perspectives on the church being involved in social justice issues?
Well, for me, it's part of the gospel.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can, Jesus fed the poor and died the death of a criminal. And if we're going to follow him, then we've got to do some of these social justice issues. And the Black Church was very good about that and taught us a lot about that. And I think if we're not out doing these things, if we're not out protesting what needs to be corrected, then we need to be criticized. And
I agree.
And I think right now part of the problem is that at least with some evangelicals, that they have so aligned with President Trump that a lot of the younger people are questioning the church on account of that, saying, if that's the church, then I want nothing to do with it.
And there's a lot, and there's a lot of young humans who don't need any more fuel for that fire, because think about it. This is in our DNA as humans, a criticism about congregating religious communities, whatever the tradition may be, right? What we often hear when people are critical of a church body? They're just a bunch of hypocrites, right? The word hypocrisy gets thrown around. And, I generally will say, I'll take that. You're right, because whenever I go to worship just as a person, I walk into a church as a forgiven sinner.
Absolutely.
And when I walk out of church after worship on any given day, I walk out of church as a forgiven sinner, right? There's nothing that I can do that's going to make God love me any more.
Or any less.
There's nothing that I can do that's going to make God love me any less than God already does.
Spoken like a good Lutheran.
Right? Okay, so there you go. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Woodwork is a good
the both
Catholic.
and is always there.
Yeah.
When it comes to social engagement, though, I often will say, I say this to our students all the time, and including the children of some people who are close to us right now, right? I say to them, and this, it sounds very obvious and maybe even simple, but hopefully not simplistic. Sometimes it's interesting to read one of the Jesus stories in the Bible. Choose which of the four you want to read and pay attention to some very basic things. Where did Jesus go? What did he do? And who was he hanging around with? I know that simplifies it a lot, but you'll see the real prophetic edge of the Christian witness when you pay attention to those kinds of things. And if we're not doing that, then we're not a faith that's wanting to give itself away for the sake of the world that God so loves. So I know a lot of that sounds, it's easy to say and hard to do. But I think it was Archbishop William Temple from many decades ago who said that the church is the only institution in a civil society that should exist solely for the sake of its non-members.
Wow.
Right? And so I think part of our call is to congregate. It is to gather as a community. Because I think, Charlotte, you're right. If we're not communal in our orientation as a worshiping community, then we end up maybe just being a really good social service agency or organization.
Well, and there's so much room for self-deception too. Not that the community is full profanity against that, because there's plenty of I suppose collective self-deception as well.
True story.
Yes.
But there's the only guarantee, I think, is that there's no remedy against self-deception alone. And religion is such or spirituality, or whatever you want to, whatever your term is such a dangerously powerful force. But to try and ride that wild horse alone, I think is just very, very fraught. I think there needs, that's the value of tradition. I heard G.K. Chesterton, was it? I heard this past week, said that that tradition is democracy for dead people. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. You know, get a little wisdom of the ages involved in some of our deliberations, and let their voices be heard. But you know, the social justice thing, I mean, that has just been such a passion for me, but I have been getting increasingly frustrated and challenged, and basically, I think, increasingly honest with myself that this country does not leave me a party I can vote for in good conscience.
Yep.
I mean, I have almost always voted for the same party my entire political life, but I am, you know, most Americans would say, many Americans would say, I am almost rabidly pro-life. You know, I am just appalled by the things that I hear Democratic candidates say about the issue of abortion and the way they understand that. And you know, these laws are being passed, and I understand all the passions, I think, but you know, the laws are being passed about the fetal heart rate, heartbeat bills that would outlaw abortions at approximately 6 weeks. And you know, the comment is, but a woman wouldn't even know that she's pregnant then. And you know, just, which is clearly, you know, a fact, but just oblivious to the other fact that there's another life involved in this issue. You know, and so it's just.
But on the other hand, Charlotte, I know many Catholics that are very passionate about immigration.
Oh,
and they say, you know, there are enough people working on the pro-life issue. Let's get some other issues in here too. And a great one would be immigration.
That's probably how I've, you know, calmed myself year after year.
And you go back to reading your Daniel Barrett.
There are other issues. Oh God, yes. You know, Dorothy, I love them all. But I mean, Dorothy Day was, you know, was very outspoken about abortion. Very. We turn all these people into little plastic saints that just fit what we want to project onto them, you know.
We do, and so this is like, so at our little shop in Dubuque at Wartburg Seminary, we're one tiny little Lutheran theological school in Dubuque, Iowa, which is by affiliation 70% Roman Catholic, and is often referred to as the Little Rome because it sits on 7 bluffs, and all of these things, right? I mean, where it's so weird that you have this Lutheran seminary nestled in Dubuque, Iowa, of all places. But especially in the last number of years, we've been very, in some ways, very vocal and very bold about trying to distinguish the kind of Christianity to which we're giving witness. Not that we have any monopoly on it, not that it's an exclusivist claim, but we're trying to distinguish between what we call a Christianity that is aligned with the witness of Jesus and a Christianity that is more modern and evangelical in its expression that often tends to focus more on social and political issues. Not that any of that isn't connected to any witness to a faith. I mean, the gospel and culture are always deeply connected. They should be deeply distinguishable, but they're deeply connected. I mean, the Christian gospel, any faith tradition is always evinced, it's always embodied through cultural expressions. But in these latter days especially, we're trying to pay attention, again, like I was saying earlier, to what may seem like pretty simple and obvious things, without resorting to the what would Jesus do kind of cheesy, trite saying, but rather a witness to the faith that's aligned to the life and witness of Jesus, and that isn't monopolized by social and political issues. I know you can't separate those out. I get that. But it's pretty easy for a faith to be co-opted by very powerful and very popular political and social issues.
Which is happening.
Right? Globally, not even just in this America, but globally. And that's, I mean, for religious leaders of any character and kind, that's hard work.
Yeah, it is.
to do that, I mean, to make those distinctions, and to do so in a way that's both careful and kind.
Yeah.
You know, we just lost one of the most significant voices, young voices, this last weekend in what I would call a kind of kind and expansive and inclusive Christianity, and that's Rachel Held Evans, who at the age of 37 very suddenly died. And, you know, one of the things about Rachel Held Evans is that she was bold, right? And she was not afraid to be direct and honest as a former modern evangelical who was making a transition into the Episcopal Church, right, where she ended up. But here's the thing, she was able to be honest and direct and courageous and kind and welcoming. She encouraged and included the voices of those who had been marginalized historically. And whatever she could do from her platform, she made sure that people had an opportunity to be heard. So I want to just kind of highlight the witness and the work of Rachel Held Evans in what little moment I have here, because that's the kind of Christian voice that I think this world needs desperately.
Well, as much as I would like to ask some more deep questions, if I could get, because we have about 3 minutes left, if I could get quick answers on how the church can be effective going forward, if you guys have quick thoughts on how the church can be effective, your opinion.
Well, I think the church needs to be out in the public square. You know, we need to be out with bullhorns when things are wrong and saying that, and sticking with people who are the underdogs.
Charlotte, please.
Yeah, I would agree with that. With the note just stolen sort of from Nate, that when they're out with their blowhorns in public, they need to be careful about being co-opted, as careful as they can be. There are so many problems that it would be just so lovely to solve it politically. In other words, to put the power of the state behind, people having access to this need or to that need. But that, what are the compromises that need to be made in order to get there is always a question to ask.
I think it's a great opportunity for us right now. The fact that the church, the life of the churches is in decline is almost indisputable. It is. You can quantify it, and you can look at it in other ways too. And one can be cynical about that, or one can grab a hold of an old biblical nugget, which is that sometimes something has to die before it can be reborn.
Good. Well, I thank you guys for a great conversation today. We obviously couldn't exhaust this topic, but I think we at least scratched the surface, and hopefully for you who joined us this morning, you got something from what you heard. And if for nothing else, I think we want to make sure that Christ is taken to our communities. And so with that, we say good day and thank you.